I walked down the aisle alone in Portland, Oregon, with sunlight spilling through the vineyard and a soft breeze carrying the scent of roses. The ceremony took place on a small estate overlooking green hills and winding trails, the kind of place I had dreamed about as a girl, but never thought I would actually stand in wearing white. Guests turned as I appeared at the end of the aisle, a slow hush falling over them. The string quartet played softly, but even their melody couldn't drown out the sound of my heartbeat. And though everything looked perfect, 3 empty front row seats stared back at me like open wounds, seats reserved for my mother Linda, my father Robert, and my brother Evan. They had promised to come. Weeks before, I'd received a polite text from my mother saying they would try to make it. My father didn't respond at all. Evan, the golden child, the family's pride, simply said he was too busy managing his new real estate deal. I told myself I was ready for their absence, that it wouldn't matter. But standing there in that quiet moment, it did. The ache sat heavy in my chest, familiar but sharper than I expected. At the altar, Alex Bennett stood waiting. His expression was steady, calm, grounded, certain. When our eyes met, he gave me a small smile that said everything was going to be okay. He didn't need words, he never did. As I reached him, he whispered that I looked calm and fearless. I tried to laugh, but my voice cracked, and he squeezed my hands tighter. The officiant began, and I drew in a slow breath, reminding myself that this moment was mine, not theirs. While repeating my vows, I thought about all the times growing up when I'd longed for my parents' approval. In our 2-story house in Columbus, Ohio, my brother Evan's trophies covered every surface of the living room: soccer championships, debate plaques, even a ribbon from a spelling bee he barely prepared for. My accomplishments, on the other hand, were taped quietly to the inside of my bedroom door, where no one but me ever saw them. When Evan won something, my parents hosted dinner parties. When I won something, they said "good job" on their way out the door. They always said Evan had ambition, that he was meant to take the family name further. I was the helper, the listener, the one told to understand. I remember nights when I stayed up late under my desk lamp, studying for scholarships I knew they wouldn't notice, while they cheered for Evan's college admissions. When I earned my own acceptance letter to a program in New York City, my father barely looked up from his newspaper. "That's nice," he said. "Evan's already talking about grad school in Europe." That was the first time I understood that love in our house wasn't given freely. It had to be earned, and even then, only if you shone the way they wanted. The officiant's voice brought me back to the present. "Do you, Caroline, take this man to be your husband?" "I do," I said. My voice was clear, even strong. For once, I didn't care who was or wasn't watching. After the ceremony, Alex and I took photos in the vineyard, laughter breaking through the weight that had sat on me all morning. He leaned close and said, "You didn't need them here. You never did." I smiled, though my chest still felt tight. He was right. It wasn't about them anymore. That night, instead of a grand reception, we went home to our brick townhouse in Seattle, Washington. It was small, cozy, with pale wooden floors and a wall of books that we'd built together. We sat at the kitchen island, still in our wedding clothes, eating pepperoni pizza straight from the box and sipping red wine from mismatched glasses. There were no photographers, no speeches, no approval to chase, just peace. Alex handed me a tablet with a message from Dr. Maria Lewis, my former professor, and the closest thing to a mentor I had ever known. "Keep building," she'd written. "When the noise gets loud, build anyway." Her words wrapped around me like armor. I leaned back in my chair, looking around at our imperfect little house. The stairs creaked when you stepped too hard. The window frames needed repainting. But it was ours, every inch of it. It felt more like home than the house in Columbus ever did. For years, I believed that success would finally earn my parents' respect, that if I worked harder, proved myself smarter, maybe they would see me. But tonight, surrounded by quiet and warmth, I realized I didn't need to be seen by them anymore. Alex reached for my hand. "You know," he said, "I think they'll regret missing today." "Maybe," I answered. "But if they don't, that's fine too." I thought back to the empty seats, to how the sunlight had fallen on them like a spotlight on what was missing. It no longer felt like rejection. It felt like release. They had chosen their priorities, and I was finally choosing mine. Later that night, I walked upstairs and stood by the window, watching the street lamps glow on the wet pavement. Somewhere out there, my parents were probably talking about Evan's next business move, maybe even laughing about my small wedding. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the life ahead of me, the one I had built without their help. I whispered to myself, "You made it." For the first time, those words didn't sound like defiance, they sounded like peace. Alex joined me, wrapping his arms around my waist. We watched the city lights flicker, the kind that seemed to hum with quiet possibility. My old life had been about chasing approval. My new one would be about building purpose. That night, I placed Dr. Lewis's message on the dresser beside my wedding bouquet. It would remind me, whenever the old ache crept back, that I wasn't defined by absence. The empty chairs had marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. A chapter where I finally stopped asking to be chosen and started choosing myself. And as I drifted to sleep in the house that smelled of roses and rain, I knew one thing for certain: I would never sit waiting for their applause again. 2 years after the wedding, Seattle had become my rhythm. Its gray skies, coffee shops, and quiet corners gave me the peace I had once prayed for. Each morning began the same way: black coffee, a walk by the waterfront, and hours spent refining the last stages of my software company's deal. What started at our kitchen table as a late-night experiment had grown into a full-fledged platform that helped small shops manage online orders, deliveries, and inventory without needing complex spreadsheets or costly consultants. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and it worked. That spring, I sat in a glass conference room on the 12th floor of an office building overlooking Pike Place Market. Papers were spread before me. Lawyers on both sides spoke in measured tones, and the air smelled faintly of espresso and ink. I had imagined this moment for years, but when the buyer's representative slid the final contract across the table, my hands still trembled. The sale price was printed clearly: $46 million. My breath caught. I was selling the company I'd built from scratch, one that had begun as an act of survival and turned into my voice in a noisy world. When I signed, a quiet calm replaced the shock. It wasn't pride exactly, it was relief. I had proved, beyond argument, that I was capable of building something meaningful. That afternoon, I met Alex at a small Italian restaurant tucked between the market stalls. He brought flowers and a mischievous grin. "So," he said, leaning forward, "how does it feel to officially join the 8-figure club?" I laughed. Strangely normal. We clinked glasses of white wine, and I told him that despite everything, I didn't want to move or change our lives too much. We still loved our townhouse, the creaky stairs, the uneven porch, the neighbor who always watered her plants at sunrise. It wasn't the kind of home that screamed wealth, but it felt like ours. Alex nodded, saying he loved that about me, that I never lost myself in noise or numbers. Still, I allowed myself one indulgence. A few days later, I walked into a Tesla showroom and bought a silver Model S I had been dreaming about since college. I paid cash. No negotiations, no hesitation. When I parked it outside our home, I didn't post a picture online or tell anyone. It was my quiet reward for every night I'd stayed up coding while the rest of the world slept. That evening, Alex made pasta while I opened a bottle of champagne. We danced barefoot in the kitchen, laughing over spilled sauce and clinking glasses. Later, I sent an email to Dr. Maria Lewis, the mentor who had once told me that talent only mattered if you paired it with persistence. She replied within an hour, "Money is a tool. Tools only matter when you build something worth keeping." For a week, life felt simple. I met with accountants, set up trusts, and made plans for the foundation I'd always dreamed of starting. I thought about helping students from small towns who had big ideas but no support, people like me at 17, sitting under a dim desk lamp while the rest of the family cheered for someone else. I didn't know it then, but those dreams were about to be tested. It started with a message from my mother. "We need to talk. Family meeting tomorrow. Important." No congratulations, no warmth. Just that. My stomach twisted. I hadn't spoken to my parents much since the wedding, not because of anger, but because silence had always been safer. I showed the text to Alex. He looked thoughtful. Do you want me to come? Yes, I said after a long pause. And we'll meet them somewhere public. We flew to Columbus the next morning and rented a small conference room at a downtown hotel. I asked the staff to bring in water and then give us privacy. My father, Robert, walked in first, carrying a leather folder. My mother followed, her lips tight. Evan joined by video call from Boston, his tone impatient, as if he were already late for something more important. Let's get straight to the point, my father said, sliding the folder across the table. Inside were bank statements, mortgage documents, and overdue notices. We're behind on the house payments. The bank is threatening foreclosure. My mother's voice quivered slightly. Your brother's tuition for his MBA is overdue, too.
He's been working so hard, Caroline.
You know how much potential he has. Evan leaned toward the camera. You've got more money than you need. You just bought a new car. I'm not asking for charity, just family support. Family support. Those words rang in my ears like an old echo from childhood. Every time Evan failed, someone else picked him up. Every time I succeeded, it was met with silence. I looked through the numbers carefully. They weren't just struggling, they were drowning. Vacations, renovations, luxury cars. They had spent like their income would never end. When did this start? I asked quietly. My father bristled. We don't need a lecture. We need help. You owe your family that much. I took a slow breath and placed my phone on the table, pressing record. For clarity, I said evenly, I'm recording this meeting so I can remember every detail correctly. No one objected, though my mother looked uneasy. I'll tell you what I'll do, I said after a pause. I'm not writing a check today, but I will find a way to use my success to make a real difference. Evan rolled his eyes. That's not what we need. We need money now. My mother leaned forward, pleading. Caroline, please. Don't be heartless. We raised you. I met her eyes. You raised me to be quiet. I stopped being quiet when I learned to build something for myself. The silence stretched. My father muttered something about ingratitude. Evan ended the call abruptly. I gathered the papers, slid them back across the table, and stood. You'll have my answer in writing within 48 hours. As Alex and I walked toward the elevator, my heart pounded. I expected guilt to follow, but instead I felt light, free in a way I hadn't since childhood. Inside the elevator, Alex took my hand. You handled that perfectly, he said softly. You're not responsible for saving people who refuse to save themselves. I nodded, though my mind was already racing with ideas. There was another way to respond, one that didn't reward manipulation but still created something good. That night on the flight home, I stared out the window at the dark stretch of sky and whispered a quiet promise to myself. I will honor the woman who taught me to build, not beg. And this time, my actions would speak louder than any apology I had ever received. Back in Seattle, the gray morning sky hung low over the city when I made my decision. I sat at the long wooden table in our townhouse, coffee cooling beside a pile of documents, and called our attorney, Grace Turner. Grace had helped me draft the sale contract for my company, and she had a calm voice that could steady a storm. When she answered, I didn't waste time with small talk. I don't want to repeat the pattern, I told her. I'm not pouring money into another hole. I want to build something better. She listened, then asked what I had in mind. That's when I said it aloud for the first time. A scholarship foundation. For first-generation students. For builders, not beggars. There was a pause on the line, then Grace said, I like it. Let's do this the right way. By noon, she looped in Daniel Cook, my accountant, and we started mapping out the structure. I wanted transparency, legal strength, and long-term impact. The foundation would be named after Dr. Maria Lewis, the woman who had believed in me when no one else did. I called her that afternoon to ask permission. Maria Lewis Scholarship Foundation? She repeated, her voice soft with surprise. You're naming it after me? I smiled. After the person who taught me that building something meaningful is the best form of defiance. There was a long pause, then she laughed. Then defy the world, Caroline. And do it loudly. Within a week, the foundation was incorporated in Washington state with a $12 million endowment. The paperwork was thick, but the purpose was clear: to help first-generation students and young entrepreneurs in the United States start projects that improved their communities. We partnered with a university in Chicago for oversight and a local bank in Seattle for disbursements. It was more money than my parents had ever dreamed of asking for, but unlike their demands, this money would grow roots. Once everything was official, I drafted an email to my family. I wrote carefully, choosing every word with the precision of someone defusing a bomb. Mom, Dad, Evan, I've given your request a lot of thought. Rather than offer temporary help, I've decided to invest in something that will help many people, not just one household. I've created the Dr. Maria Lewis Scholarship Foundation with an initial commitment exceeding the amount you asked for. The foundation will fund students and community builders across the country. I hope you'll see that this choice honors the spirit of real growth and responsibility. Attached, you'll find the official documents and a link to the foundation's site. I've also attached the transcript from our recent meeting to ensure clarity about what was discussed. I wish you all well. I reread the message twice, then hit send. It felt final, clean, not cruel. Alex read it over my shoulder and kissed my temple. You did the right thing, he said. We went for a walk along the waterfront afterward. The air was crisp, and seagulls circled above the ferries moving across the bay. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace. But it didn't last. By evening, the storm had begun. My mother posted on social media first. An old family photo, me at 16, smiling awkwardly between my parents and Evan, captioned with, "Some daughters forget where they came from once they see a little success." Within hours, comments poured in. Some sympathetic, some cruel. My father followed with a vague post about ungrateful children and forgotten sacrifices. Evan went live on his account, claiming I had turned my back on my family during their hardest time. He asked his followers to share his story, painting me as cold, greedy, and heartless. At first, I tried to ignore it, but journalists reached out the next morning, asking for a statement. I gave one short interview. I didn't defend myself, I just explained the foundation's mission and thanked Dr. Lewis for her influence. This isn't about resentment, I told the reporter. It's about responsibility. To my surprise, the public responded differently from what my family expected. The backlash turned on them. People asked why, instead of applying for a grant or restructuring their debt, they had chosen to shame their own daughter online. Others praised the idea of the foundation, calling it a better legacy than any bailout could buy. Within days, a Seattle community paper published an article titled "From Family Feud to Future Builders: The Woman Turning Conflict into Opportunity." They described my story briefly, but focused on the foundation's mission, highlighting students who worked 2 jobs, cared for siblings, and still chased their dreams. I didn't ask for the attention, but I accepted it. When Dr. Lewis called after reading the article, she sounded proud. "Caroline," she said, "the loudest demands always come from those who gave the least. You're finally giving to people who'll use it." Her words settled into me like truth. But my family wasn't done. 3 days later, I heard pounding at our townhouse door. Through the peephole, I saw my father on the porch, face red, my mother standing behind him. They had driven all the way from Ohio. "Caroline, open this door," he shouted. "You think you're better than your own blood?" I didn't move. I called Grace immediately and told her everything. Within hours, she filed a request for a protective order citing harassment. "You've been generous," she said firmly. "Now you need to be safe." That night, I installed a new security system and a doorbell camera. The next morning, my father left a handwritten note tucked under the doormat. It said, "You've embarrassed the family. Don't forget who gave you life." I didn't tear it up. I scanned it, sent a copy to Grace for records, and placed the original in a folder marked evidence. Then I made myself tea and sat by the window. As the city lights flickered against the dark water, I realized something simple but powerful. Peace isn't something anyone grants you. It isn't a trophy or a permission slip. Peace is a boundary you protect over and over again, even when people call you selfish for holding it. The next morning, I woke early and drove to the Foundation's temporary office downtown. The sun was rising over the Sound, and the skyline glowed gold. I unlocked the door, flipped on the lights, and stood for a moment in the quiet. The walls were bare, the air still smelled of new paint, and yet I felt more at home than I ever had in the house where I grew up. Because for the first time, I wasn't chasing approval. I was building something that would last. The following spring, Seattle felt different, warmer, calmer, alive with new beginnings. The gray clouds that usually lingered above the Sound parted more often, letting the sun glance off the water and the glass towers downtown. It had been nearly a year since I launched the Dr. Maria Lewis Scholarship Foundation, and the first official event was set to take place that April. I'd spent months reviewing applications, reading stories that reminded me of the younger version of myself. People trying to build something meaningful with no safety net to fall back on. The event was held in a renovated community center downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it was open and filled with light, just like I wanted. When the doors opened, students from all over the country began to arrive. Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, small towns I'd never even heard of. I met Harper, a young woman who had rebuilt her aunt's failing bakery in Minneapolis by creating an online ordering app and hiring local teens. Then there was Luis, a quiet man from Denver who restored old bicycles and used the profits to start a mentorship program for kids in his neighborhood. Listening to their stories felt like watching hope take form. When I stood on stage that afternoon to hand out the 10 inaugural grants of $50,000 each, my voice shook, not from nerves, but from pride. These funds are not gifts, I told them. They're tools. Build something that lasts. I saw tears in the crowd, and for a brief second, I imagined my younger self among them, sitting in the back, wondering if anyone would ever believe in her the way Dr. Lewis once did. Afterward, the city paper ran a full article about the event, calling it a vision for builders who come from nothing. The following week, a journalist from San Francisco reached out, asking how we ensured fairness in our selection process. I invited her to the office, where she spent hours with our small team, reviewing our scoring sheets and board policies. She left impressed. 2 months later, a national magazine published a feature on Dr. Lewis and mentioned me in one paragraph that said I chose structure over spectacle. I framed that line and hung it by the kitchen window, right above the herb garden Alex had planted for me. But even success couldn't stay untouched by the past. One morning, Grace called. "You should see what your parents are posting," she said quietly. I opened my phone and felt my stomach turn. My parents were back in the spotlight, claiming I had ruined them. They accused me of abandoning family, of building wealth, while letting them lose their home. Evan added fuel by posting old photos of us as children, writing long captions about forgiveness and betrayal. For a moment, anger flared, but then something unexpected happened. The comments began turning against them. Someone had found the foreclosure records, which showed a process had begun months before I even sold my company. Others unearthed receipts for their luxury trips and unpaid taxes. Slowly, the narrative shifted. People stopped believing their story. My parents' posts grew more frantic, then faded. It was strange to watch them unravel publicly, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. I just felt tired. When my father finally called weeks later, leaving a shaky voicemail that started with, "We just want to talk," I didn't answer. I forwarded the message to Grace and asked her to respond through legal channels. She drafted a polite letter that said I wished them well, but that all future contact would go through counsel. It was the cleanest boundary I'd ever drawn in my life. By summer, Alex and I bought a small lake house an hour outside Seattle. It was simple, pine floors, wide windows, a wooden deck that overlooked the still blue water. On the first night, we sat outside under a canopy of stars, the kind you barely see in the city. The air smelled of cedar and rain. Alex poured us wine, and I told him I hadn't felt this peaceful since before I knew what disappointment was. We filled the house with people who understood what real connection looked like. Fellows from the foundation visited on weekends. We hosted dinners where laughter spilled out across the lake. We weren't chasing perfection. We were living it quietly, honestly. When the foundation expanded that fall, adding new partnerships in Boston and Los Angeles, I found myself mentoring even more young founders. They came from every background imaginable: students, single parents, immigrants, dreamers. I saw pieces of my own story reflected in each of them. During workshops, I told them things no one had told me: to document every meeting, protect their time, and never confuse guilt with generosity. I reminded them that money should be a tool, not a trophy. In December, Seattle's mayor awarded the foundation a Civic Impact Medal. The ceremony was small but heartfelt. I wore a blue dress and brought Dr. Lewis as my guest. When they called us to the stage, she leaned over and whispered, "You see, Caroline, this is what happens when you build instead of beg." I laughed softly, holding her hand as the applause echoed through the hall. That night, back at the lake house, Alex and I ordered takeout, our old habit after big days. We ate on the deck as the water shimmered in the moonlight. I found myself thinking about those 3 empty chairs for my wedding. For years, they had haunted me, reminders of who didn't show up, of what I'd lost. But now, in that stillness, I saw them differently. They were no longer symbols of rejection. They were milestones. They marked the moment I stopped waiting for permission to be whole. My old family had taught me about scarcity: love measured, approval earned, affection rationed. My chosen family taught me something else: that enough isn't about abundance, it's about alignment. About peace that doesn't need an audience. As the night deepened, I glanced across the lake at the faint glow of neighboring houses and thought about everything that had brought me here: the empty seats, the painful choices, the silence I had learned to love. I didn't need closure from the past because I had already built my own future. Before we went inside, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. I would keep choosing peace, even when chaos tried to follow. I would keep mentoring, keep building, keep believing in people who remind me of the girl I once was. And if I ever felt that old ache, the need for validation, the pull of guilt, I would remember this house, this stillness, this moment. Because I finally understood that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering who stayed, who showed up, and who I became when no one else believed I could. That night, with the stars high above the lake, I closed my eyes and smiled. I had built a life not from what was given, but from what I decided to keep. And for the first time, that was more than enough.